Hi everyone, welcome back for another amazingly interesting guided reading video from the one and only Mr. Russo for your 10th grade history class. So today is about section 7.2. It's called Revolution Brings Reform and Terror. If you look at your guided reading, it's set up as a timeline of important events and important key things that were happening throughout the revolution. And then there's questions about each of those things. So we're going to go through and look at the timeline and then answer each of those questions. So the first part of the timeline talks about how the National Assembly adopts the Declaration of Rights of Man, and this brings the question, what are some rights the Declaration of the Rights of Man guaranteed to French citizens? And so three of the main ideas here are life, liberty, property, and security. Security has to do with if your life is secure, you are secure. So it's very similar to some things from one Enlightenment thinker we talked about. Also, the idea about resistance to oppression. In other words, if the government's not doing its job, you as a citizen, or you all as citizens, have a right to overthrow or resist that government. And as we learned before, I'm sure you all can guess it, those are the ideas of the one and only wonderful Mr. John Locke. So, another right that is guaranteed in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen is equal justice, as in everyone should be getting the same justice as everyone else. And that idea we read about a little bit before. That's part of what Beccaria thinks, equal application of the law to all citizens. And finally, freedom of speech and freedom of religion are two other types of rights that are guaranteed or championed in the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And you all remember who used to champion both of these things, and that's the one and only Frenchman named Voltaire. Okay, so the next event that happens a little bit later is the National Assembly reforms the status of the church. And actually, there was some kickback, and some people weren't really enthusiastic about these changes. Okay, and particularly, we had a lot of peasants, poor farmers in the countryside, who are opposed to many of the National Assembly reforms of the church. Now, these are people that are generally more conservative and who spend a lot of time at their church or practicing their faith, and they don't think that some of these changes are good. So why? Well, first of all, just like I said, they are conservative Catholics, right? Secondly, they're kind of offended and they don't like the idea that the church should be part of the state or the church should be part of the government. This was one of the first reforms during the early reforms during the French Revolution, when the National Assembly thought that the church had too much power and was abusing it. And so what they wanted to do was bring it more under control. And one way to do that would be for the government to be able to control the salaries of the priests and also at times even elect certain church officials as opposed to the church just appointing them. A lot of the conservative Catholics in the rural countryside, the peasants, did not like these reforms. You'll see in the left-hand side here, I have a painting of French peasants and also a church from Normandy. And quite a few of the paintings and the pictures I have here are quite famous. And I've oftentimes posted the name of the artist. So if you're interested in that, you could always look up who made these paintings. Next is what political factions made up the Legislative Assembly. So after a certain amount of time, the National Assembly decided to give over power to a more permanent Legislative Assembly. And so that's another governing body that's going to make the laws and have a lot of power in the country. And so, as most political entities or political systems have, there were different groups. Okay? And there's three main groups. Right? The first group is the radicals. And that's kind of what this painting is depicting on the left. Though this painting wasn't actually made till the 1830s, This is one of the most famous French Revolution paintings. This is that kind of like a battle in the streets of Paris, where the kind of third representative or peasant representatives are fighting for their liberty, are fighting against some of the oppressive ways that have been going on. So some people that are willing to go to that extreme actions to resort to violence or react in a mob mentality to attack and fight on the streets, oftentimes they want the extreme change. So they would be kind of part of what we would call the radicals. Then you have people kind of in the middle who you would call the moderates. They definitely want some changes, but they don't want as drastic changes as the radicals might. And then finally, the third political faction that made up the Legislative Assembly is the conservatives. Now, the conservatives would have been all the way to the right. That's why I put King Louis on the right side there. Portrait of him, and they're much more for having the monarchy to have control. If they could do everything they wanted to, they might take things back to the way they were before in the old ancient regime. So you have quite a few events happening then in 1792 through the spring and summer. First is Legislative Assembly declares war on Austria. Also, a lot of Parisians invaded the royal palace, and there was kind of riots and stuff happening on the streets. So here's the thing: war between France and Austria, and Prussia actually joins in too. Now the question is, not only were the French ready to bring the war to the other countries, but the other countries were ready to fight with France. The question is, why? And that brings us to number 4. The question is, what did European monarchs fear from France? So we have Kaiser Joseph II here. He's the emperor of the Austrian Empire, or the Holy Roman Empire. And then you have Frederick William II. He's the king of Prussia. Prussia is a region, today it's in northern or northeastern Germany, or parts of Poland as well. And that is kind of one of the strongest German kingdoms before Germany was a country. So what did European monarchs fear from France? Well, there's a lot of revolutionary ideas going on in France. People want to change things. People want to give more power to the people and take it away from the monarchs. The monarchs in other countries did not like that, and they didn't want the revolution to spread to their country. So they're worried that it could affect their own power and their own wealth and their own interests. And so that's part of why they were ready and willing to fight a war against France, because they feared the idea of revolution spreading. Next up, we have during 1793, King Louis is executed. He's put on trial for treason, and they decide and vote. By one vote it wins to execute the king. He no longer had his position of power or anything compared to what he used to do. And there were problems happening in Paris before that. King Louis being executed is kind of like one of the final straws in terms of the radicals getting their way and overthrowing the monarchy complete that. Before that, you had the September massacres. This is when they killed thousands of people in the prisons, and because they were afraid that the people in the prisons would break out and take away the reforms of the revolution. So what effects did that have on the government? Well, first of all, the Legislative Assembly kind of gives up completely on limited monarchy, right? They don't want a monarchy at all anymore, and so therefore the king loses all power and eventually goes on to be executed. When we say depose the king, it means it took the king out of his position and took away his power. Okay, and then shortly after that, the Legislative Assembly calls for a new election because it decides it needs to replace itself. So, what was the stated claim of Robespierre and his supporters? Robespierre comes to power. He becomes the leader of the Committee of Public Safety, which is supposed to overlook France and bring order back. But at the same time, the Committee of Public Safety starts to execute a lot of people at a rapid manner, and that's called the Reign of Terror. And so what was Robespierre, who's the leader of this group of the Committee of Public Safety and carrying out the terror, what are their aims? And what is him and his supporters' aims? Well, first of all, they want to have a republic of virtue. Now, virtue, in this respect, this isn't the virtue that we were talking about when we were talking about Wollstonecraft. This is a different virtue. This virtue means all citizens in the country contribute to the state. They're all in it together. They've all got to contribute and put forth work in the state. And Robespierre famously said, in order to get people to have virtue, we need to have the terror to inspire them to be part of the government, to contribute positively. Because without terror, the virtue idea wouldn't even work. Okay, and so the last question we're going to talk about has to do with the end of the terror. So the terror ends basically when other people on the Committee of Public Safety, they turn against Robespierre. And he goes on trial and he is himself executed. So Robespierre was sending thousands of people to the guillotine, and it ended up that he met the same fate in the end. So what are some of the consequences of that reign of terror ending? Well, first of all, like we said, there were thousands of people executed in Paris, but thousands and thousands in other parts of the country as well. So many, many deaths, and that's one of the reasons people wanted to stop it too, because many said, there's way too many deaths, this is senseless death, we need to end this from happening. Secondly, many people got tired of the radical left, as in the radicals that wanted huge changes and were willing to use violence to bring in those changes. And therefore, a lot of them started to support conservative politicians instead, either moderates in the middle or conservatives that wanted to bring back some kind of order from the madness and the craziness that had been happening during the terror. Okay, thanks a lot, guys, for listening, and we'll see you in class soon.